TCMO podcast with Zachary.
Hi, everyone. This is Zachary Louie, board director or a board director at the Professional Association of Traditional Chinese Medicine Ontario. We like to thank Wuji Xuan Life Wellness for supporting traditional Chinese medicine in Ontario by providing the space, equipment, and software for this episode. So, with me today is Nicholas Duchnowski. He has a master's in Chinese medicine at PCOM, and he is the sole brain genius at TCMstudy.net, where he has multimedia platforms speaking on traditional Chinese medicine, specifically geared towards students learning traditional Chinese medicine and graduating and passing their tests. So, welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've worked with a lot about education in the sphere of having been a former professor. Now you're currently educating students through YouTube and Instagram with different variations, such as memes, which are great. So, this is what got you started on that journey.
So I feel like it's a couple things that kind of combine together that maybe the way it really started is I was teaching this class and it was an optional review class, so attendance wasn't required. But there was one student who came up to me that she had been coming every week, and then she said, I really like these classes. I learn a lot, but my work schedule just changed, and so I can't come anymore. But she basically said, "Is it okay if one of my friends records you, and that way I can listen to it later?" And I said, "Yeah, that's totally fine." But then I got to thinking about it, and I was like, I've had this happen where students like set a little like their phone on their desk or something and record things. And I always feel like when you do it from that far away, the audio quality is terrible. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I could just wear a microphone and record it. And that way, at least the audio would be better. And then I kind of thought, well, when we have like a 2-hour lecture, I'm actually not talking for that entire 2 hours. So maybe I could like record it and then edit it down. And that became a thing. It's like, well, maybe instead of trying to record in a classroom where everything's echoey and a bunch of stuff is going on, I should just sit down and record stuff myself. So that's kind of how it started is I would take something that I was doing in a lecture, and then I would go home and just try to condense it down into like 20 or 30 minutes as a review. And it was initially, it started with this one student who was coming to this optional class. And then I started doing that with my regular classes where I'd give a lecture, then I'd try to do something that they could review afterwards. And it actually worked out really well because I had some times where a student would be absent, and so they entirely missed the lecture, but they still listened to this recording and they were able to jump right in. They came in to the next lecture, they were able to pass the weekly quiz, and they were able to move. They weren't behind at all because they had this recording. And then it kind of like went from there where it's like, well, if I'm doing this recording, maybe it would make sense to sync that up with my slides so I could attach the audio to the slides. And then it became more complicated where it's like, oh, I'm going to have emojis dancing around on the screen and everything like that. So I think that was the major part of it. The other maybe less positive aspect of it is, I don't know if you felt this way like when you're teaching, but something I noticed when I started is a lot of teachers get stuck teaching the same class over and over, and you can tell after a while they're kind of bored of it. Like I
Yeah.
was before I was actually teaching as faculty, I was a TA, and I was a TA for the same herb teacher several semesters in a row. And I noticed that everything was the same. Like he would have a class on Tuesday and a class on Thursday, and he would tell the same stories, tell the same jokes semester after semester. Like I knew every joke he was going to tell. And I was like, oh, I even though I was only like a year into teaching, I started feeling that where it's like, I'm just up here saying the same thing over and over again. Maybe I should just record it once, and then everybody can listen to it whenever they want to.
Yep.
And that way, I can move on to something else instead of repeating the same thing over and over. So that was another aspect of it too.
Absolutely. I mean, from teaching myself even, it is very much you get in the routine and we have to teach for Machiocho. That's the core thing,
Oh,
at least up here.
yeah.
So everyone has their love and hate of Machiocho. It gets you through your boards, sort of. Depends on the teacher if they make it live, right?
Yeah.
However, you do use things like you were mentioning you're using slides, you're using emojis. How did you find the reaction of the students when you start to engage in a different manner with visual cues synced to the audio?
Uh, I really liked it. I think a lot of the students liked it because at first I would just do the recordings just because it was easier. And then I started doing a mix. And then I once had a student that I had something that I only had a recording and I didn't have the visual stuff to it yet. And she was like, oh, why can't you make a video of this? Like, I think she was just a very visual person. And so I was like, well, you can print out the slides and flip through. I feel like that was an old thing back in the day where like you would listen to a recording and it would beep every time you were supposed to like change the slide or like click the projector. And I was like, oh, maybe I should like do that, like beep, go to the next page. But I think for the visual people, it really helped. And then I was just trying to make it more fun because I know that this is a thing I think with videos, this is something we see in the research on YouTube videos, that people have a very short attention span, that if you upload a 10-minute video, you're very lucky if people even watch 2 minutes of it. This is kind of my concern, that now that with pandemic, a lot of the schools are closed and they're doing online classes. I don't know how anybody sits on a Zoom class for 3 hours and stays awake. So part of it was just I wanted to add something to make it more exciting. And so it started out with simple things like, oh, I'll underline things and draw arrows. And then I tried to make it more fun as like, I'm not a very good graphic designer or artist or anything like that. So it's like, oh, I can just use emojis. And I started getting really creative with emojis. So I think that the other thing about that is it kind of started to add in my own personality and my own sense of humor. And I think like I was kind of worried, like I use a lot of poop emojis and like I wasn't sure if like people would be like, oh, that's really unprofessional, or if they were really into it. And I think it's kind of some of each. So
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's putting the personality into things. It's really connecting to your audience.
yeah.
So on that point of like using your personality with the poop emojis, what was your initial response with that when you started throwing that out there? Like, did you get resistance from people? Were some people like, no, this doesn't jive with us? Or did you find that people actually found that because you had a personal connection and you're putting that in, the response was just greater as a whole?
Yeah, I think with that kind of stuff, I never got any pushback. I think once I started doing a podcast, and then I said I'm calling it Drunken Acupuncture Podcast. I think there are a couple of people who are like, oh, that doesn't seem like a very professional thing. I'm like, have you met any Taoists? Have you heard of Levi? But in terms of the lecture videos, I do think that was actually an interesting progression. That I think the more of myself I put into it, the more people were able to connect to it. And I guess maybe like kind of a story we can tell about this is when I was first making the YouTube channel, one of the big things I went back and forth on was what should my profile picture be, which is like a very small, insignificant thing, but it's like you always have a profile picture that's associated with your Facebook page or your YouTube channel or whatever. And so I was really like going back and forth about like, should this be a logo or should this be my face? And really, I was leaning towards trying to make some sort of logo because I was like, I don't want this to be about me. I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to be famous. This is about the information and the content. That's what I want people to come for, not for me. And this kind of, at the time, I knew a lot of yoga influencers who it's like they were on Instagram just taking selfies, and it's like it's all about them and showing themselves off rather than about the actual topic. So it's like, I don't want to do that. I just want it to be about the information, about the teaching and everything like that. Well, there were kind of two things that happened. One is when I was in school, I went and asked a bunch of students, like, which one do you think I should do? And some people said one, but then one woman actually said like, oh, well, acupuncture is it's probably mostly a female audience. You might do well to use your face. I'm like, that's kind of creepy, but okay. And I think really what it came down to is, like I said, I'm not a good graphic designer. Like I was trying to design a logo and just nothing worked. So I think it's like, I was just like, whatever, I'll just use my face. And so kind of what I realized over time is that I was wrong and this other student was right. That I was trying to say this is about the information, this is about the material that's being taught, but actually over time I realized that people were coming for me, that they liked my personality, they liked my style. There are other people teaching Chinese medicine. There are even other people on YouTube doing a little bit of teaching Chinese medicine, but my personality, my style is very different. That's what separates me, and people were coming for that. And so as I started realizing that, I was like, oh, it's not just about the information, it's about me building a personal brand. Then I started really leaning into that. That's when I started doing things like I put Peanut M&Ms in my videos, where it's just like I'm sitting here eating peanut M&Ms, like to the point where people thought that like I was sponsored by Peanut M&Ms. like, are you kidding? Like, why would Peanut M&Ms sponsor a YouTube channel with 5,000? Anyway, so I started doing that. I started putting like sometimes I'd put like little Star Wars characters in the background, and just doing different things that really broaden my personality. Lately, since I've gotten a cat, I put my cat
You've been doing
up
a
in
lot of the
different
cat
places.
videos I've been seeing. So
Yeah. So even like when people sign up for my email list, like the thank you page has a picture of my cat, and it's like the cat says thank you. And so I've noticed that. So I kind of really started leaning into putting more of my personality into there. And I think that actually really attracts people. And I think we could bring this back even to people who are starting a practice, that I think I kind of had I made the same mistakes in terms of starting a practice. That when I was in school, I was like, oh, it's about the medicine, it's about healing people, that I'm going to be such a good practitioner, I'm going to get such good results that people are going to, I don't need to market myself, I don't need to, like, people are just going to get such good results, they're going to come back and tell all their friends. And over time, I realized that it's actually not about that. It's people are not necessarily coming for the acupuncture, they're coming to see me. And on the one hand, that sounds really narcissistic, but on the other hand, I think it's true. And that also gives you sort of like a unique positioning. They talk about what's your positioning in the business. And so like when I was in San Diego, if you Googled just in my area, there were 50 acupuncturists in my area. And so there was a lot to choose from. So when people would say, is the market saturated? Can you still get clients? Can you still make money? Kind of my response would be, people aren't coming for acupuncture, they're coming to see me. And so I think that's another thing that can be done, not just like with me in a YouTube channel, but in your acupuncture practice, kind of lean into some of those things of making it about you, making it about your personality, because people aren't coming just for the acupuncture or just for the results. They're coming for that connection with the practitioner. They're coming to see you. So I think that was kind of the lesson I learned from that.
right. And that's a horribly terrifying lesson when you think about it.
Yeah.
Right. Because we go to school and everyone's like, it's about the medicine. It's about what you can do. How fast can you get a treatment in? And at the end of the day, it's you. The medicine is you. People are coming to you. And now you have to be vulnerable enough to put yourself out there. Right. So, like, even with my experience of things, I mean, I'll joke around, but people know my background. I love my anime. I love my manga.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd at heart, but I'm also in a 3-piece. So that already tells you a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? About like where my headset is. And how did you lean into that more? Because I'm sure there were some pain points there where you're like, I shouldn't have to do this, or why am I doing this in the first place?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, there's, I guess we can talk about it on two different levels. Like on with making videos and putting stuff online and having an online presence, I think it was a lot easier. That it was just like, oh, I can start to have fun with this. That I think maybe at first I was just way too serious. And then I think when I was teaching in person, I would joke around a lot more. I would use coarse language, or I'm just like a very grumpy person, and so people would call me Eeyore, and I would kind of embrace that and be like, okay, we're doing the grumpy shouty version today. And so I think like for that, it kind of started off with that, and then I just kind of realized online I could have more fun with it. And so I think I was enjoying it more, and the people on the other end were enjoying it more. I think like in like an acupuncture practice situation, it's a little bit more difficult and a little bit more delicate, because on the one hand, yes, you do want to connect, you do want to be vulnerable, but you also have to have good boundaries. And I think sometimes I ran into those problems where it's like I had patients like texting me at weird hours or calling me or doing stuff like that. And I had to be like, I'm not actually your friend. Like, I don't actually want to hang out with you. And
I'm a
so,
practitioner, so let's keep that line there.
yeah. It's like, I'm not on call for you as like your personal therapist or anything like that. So I think that it was a little bit more delicate of, again, people weren't coming in when they came in for an acupuncture treatment. They weren't coming in for a robot. They didn't want to be just like hooked up to a machine that could give the perfect treatment. They were coming in because they enjoyed talking to me. They enjoyed being in my office. I know there are other practitioners that they run three treatment rooms at a time. They try to get people in and out as quickly as possible. My positioning or my unique value proposition was, I like to sit and take time with my patients. And so people would come in and we'd, chat for 15 minutes or so. And I thought that was actually part of the treatment. And so, but again, it's kind of like there's some delicacy there where it's like I'm trying to establish a connection, but I'm trying to establish a connection and a rapport as a practitioner, not that people should then get confused and have some counter transference or whatever and think that like, oh, we're friends and we should be hanging out. So
It is a delicate situation on that, because at least I could speak for Toronto. It's what I think we're 4 million, maybe a bit more. It's like, why there's an acupuncturist every single
yeah.
block, right? So it's like, what makes you special? Why do people come to you? And I think this is one of the bigger points, where if you're a practitioner, I mean, we are going to have the practitioner back end. This is the front end for everyone else watching.
Mhm.
However, this is where I would look at this and say, like, what makes you you? What makes you jive? What makes you spark? Because it's one of these pieces where, when we're looking at that, why go to you when someone else is just down the block? And if you're going to go play a game on financials, that's always going to be a losing battle.
Yeah.
So this is where, do you have any suggestions for anyone just listening right now, like how they could dive into their personality a bit more and say, well, this is what I'm about?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. Actually, if you want to, there's like a really good a TED talk by, I think his name is Hanlon. But there's a really good TED talk where the guy, it's like a primal branding or something like that, where this guy went through and looked through that these companies or these brands that have like almost like a cult-like following. People are super fans of this brand. What characteristics do they have in common that got them that following, that people will say, I'm a Mac person versus I'm a PC person, or I'm a Chevy person versus I'm a Ford person. And he kind of broke down and gave examples of all those things that kind of tap into our like tribal instincts or primal instincts on that. And so actually, I think he wrote a book, and like I went to look at I went to Amazon to get the book, and all the reviews were like, don't bother buying the book, just listen to his, like, look at his TED Talk video. It's just as good as the book. So maybe you can just watch the TED video. But I think some of the things he said was like, one could be telling your origin story. And this is something that I've started asking people about, like, how did you get into acupuncture? What's your origin story? And that can start to open up something and start to create that connection. Like, I remember this happened when, after I just graduated, I started working as a massage therapist, because it takes a while to get your acupuncture license. So I was a massage therapist at a chiropractor. And I noticed that this was something that he did, that part of his initial intake is he would sit down with the patients and he would tell his story about he got into a car accident. He had this really bad neck pain. And at the time he was looking for a career change, and he was deciding between chiropractic and physical therapy. So he decided he was going to do both. He would try both approaches and see which one he thought worked better. And so he did both physical therapy and chiropractic, and he thought the chiropractic helped a lot more. And because of that, he decided to go into chiropractic school. And this is something like, he told me this story 10 years ago, and I still remember it. And so I think something like that, telling either why you got into the medicine, why you're doing it, what are your values, sharing your values, that's a very easy way to start. This could just even be something on your about page, or it could be something very deliberate when you talk to your patients. Because a lot of people have really good stories about like, oh, I had this really bad condition. I was in this chronic pain. I went to a doctor, nothing helped. I got these injections, I got surgery, nothing helped. And then I got acupuncture and suddenly I was better. That's a really good story that connects with people, and that can start to open that up. So I think that's a really good one. And that's I think a very appropriate one. You're not crossing any boundaries or anything like that with that one.
Yes, the power of the origin story. I
Yeah.
think, especially from just a teaching of Chinese medicine standard and just outside the more clinical standards, being able to relate to students and say, like, well, this is my story. This is why I got into it. This is why I'm even teaching you in the first
Yeah.
place. I think that's important. And I know, generally speaking, from a teacher perspective, they got to know where you came from. They absolutely need to know where you're coming from, because everyone's experience is a little bit different. So being able to break down the knowledge in a certain lens, that already sets the context for essentially the whole semester where you're coming from, once you start
Yeah.
getting into like these back end narratives.
Yeah, and I think especially with teaching, it's important to humanize it, because I think a lot of times like students and teachers butt heads. It's like it's very easy when you're a student where it's like be like, oh, this teacher is mean. They just want to make us memorize stuff. They're just like they enjoy like they're sitting. I always had this vision that teachers would always like write these really tricky questions, and they'd be like sitting at home in the dark alone with one light on, just like laughing maniacally, like missed that one. Like they enjoyed the red X or something like that. And so I think yeah, especially with teaching, it's really good to do that, just to like humanize it, that it's not we're not here to lord over you or make you feel dumb, that we're doing this for a reason. It's certainly not because of the money. We're doing this for a reason, and that can help create that connection and kind of avoid conflict when you bring that humanity into it.
Right. And that's, I think that's a really important point. It's very much on there's the two perspectives, one as a student, one as a teacher,
Yeah.
and then there's information crossover. So one of the drills I use with students, it's like, well, how can you break this down and break the language to present to your client in an everyday way?
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, that's difficult. That's a lot of people ask this question, and I feel like I don't really have a good answer, because like on the one hand, like I'm very into the traditional aspects of Chinese medicine, and I'm very into it annoys me when people say essence instead of Jing. I'm just like, just it's easier if we don't translate things, just use the Chinese terms. And so it's almost like I have this guarded perspective from a student practitioner perspective that we should be using. I'm really into Nigel Wiseman terminology. We should be
Yep.
using as much Chinese as possible. We should be thinking in terms of Chinese medicine. We shouldn't be thinking about high blood pressure or things like that. We should keep it in the realm of liver yang rising, not try to translate things into modern terms. And that very much doesn't work when you're speaking to patients. And so it's kind of like you have to have like, I guess from my perspective, there's like the behind the scenes where in my mind, I'm thinking completely in terms of like traditional Chinese terms. And I kind of have to put on this show for the patient to explain to them what I'm doing. And I don't know, sometimes it's hard. It's like they really want to know what's going on. I'm like, well, you need to go to school for 4 years before we can even begin having this conversation. So we establish some common ground. So generally I would have to say, like, you want to simplify it as much as possible, even if it's like even if it's not the complete story or you're kind of bending the story a little bit, it's okay. Like when you teach math to a third grader, you can just say, oh, the big number goes on top. You don't need to get into like, oh, there are actually negative numbers and there are fractions. You can just say the big number goes on top. Yeah, you got this remainder. It's just left over. You can kind of fudge it a little bit in that way. And generally what I would say is I find that different people respond to different things depending on like where they're coming from. And so you kind of have to match your explanation to the patient that's in front of you. So some people are very into that like they're very scientific, very Western medical minded. And so there the explanation is going to be things like, I'm sticking a needle into the trigger point of your piriformis muscle by releasing that piriformis muscle that will release the pressure on your sciatic nerve, and that will make your pain go away. We're going to do these other points in your hands and your feet that they have an effect on the nociceptors and the way you feel pain. So it has a pain relieving effect and an anti-inflammatory effect. Some people that works really great on. When I'm in Southern California, there are a lot of hippie-ish people where if I say, oh yeah, you got too much energy going up to your head and it's disturbing your spirit. So we're sticking a lot of needles in your feet to try to bring that energy back down and really anchor you and root you. Right now you're feeling ungrounded. So we're sticking needles in your feet to ground you. And some people are really into that. I always tell the story that I had one when I was in school as a student. One of my supervisors was an older Chinese lady. And I had this patient who was a little bit out there. And while we were speaking behind the curtain, she just kind of said, do you know the names of any of the acupuncture points? I said, like, yeah, some of them, like, PC6 is Naguan, and like I know some of them. And she was like, tell him the names of the acupuncture points. I think he'd be really into that. And so yeah, I went to the dream. I was like, oh yeah, we're doing PC. This is called Naguan Inner Gate. It's about bringing balance between your inner world and the external environment. So it's like opening that gate to bring out that balance and things like that. It's like he totally loved that. Where I've had other people where they're like, I have this low back pain because of a pinched nerve. I just have to say, oh, we're releasing the muscles. So I think that was kind of my approach, is trying to tailor it to the individual patient, and then just trying to do something simple about it, like not necessarily talk about liver yang rising, or if I say spleen qi deficiency, then I have to spend 20 minutes talking about how the spleen is actually a digestive organ. So I can just say, oh, there's like stuff stuck in the middle, or you're not digesting your food properly, so you're not absorbing the nutrients, and that's why you feel fatigue. And so even though your chief complaint is fatigue, we're going to be working on your digestive system as a way to address that. And so I can try to simplify it as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you said the whole call of the acupoints, it just reminded me of this Korean drama that's on Netflix. I forget the name, but it's about an acupuncturist going back and forth in time. And he was in the Korean hospital. He's working on somebody. He's like, I get the acupuncture needles. And then he starts stabbing and making some poetic epic. It's like, I'm going to hit the thunderbolt so that it goes up to open up into, so you can smell the fragrance of life. And I watched that. It's a master class watching that. That one scene was 2 minutes. He named at least, I think it was like 7 acupoints, broke it down in a narrative way. The person's like, yes, do it. And he does it, and then the person gets a nosebleed the day after because he didn't know Western medication, because he's from like some like medieval time travel. He's like, what happened? This should have worked. But the person, he wasn't taking consideration of warfarin and things like that.
Oh yeah.
So it reminds me of that scene particularly.
Yeah, no, I was thinking like in like Dragon Ball, like an anime that's like they always call out the name of their move before they do it, like Amakakaru Hiromeki. And it's like, I think it'd be funny to do that with acupuncture, where it's like really dramatic, and I don't know.
Yeah, it would work on some clients, but not all.
Yeah, so I feel like that's like those are the major 2 types of people that you see. That if people are coming in for like sports injuries or things like that, then it may be better to stick to a scientific thing. And it can just be very vague, where it's like, oh, we're releasing the muscles, or oh, we have studies that using these needles can lower the hormones associated with stress. So that's why this is going to be good for your stress, or like things like that. It doesn't have to be too specific. Whereas there are other people that they're really into that story. And again, that's something that I think that as you bring your personality out, because some practitioners are more into the more Western scientific side, and some practitioners are really into recharging their crystals under the full moon. And so you can kind of, I think when you bring out that personality, you'll naturally attract clients who line up with your personality. So if you're on one side or the other, you'll naturally attract those people, and then you can use those explanations.
Right. So we're heading up on our public piece. So is there any last words on the public side that you like to say? Any promotions, anything coming up for you, things like that?
Not really. No, I have a YouTube channel and a website, but it's kind of weird to promote it because I feel like sometimes I put things on YouTube and it's like, this is not for everybody. This is specifically for students and for people passing their tests. So some people are like, oh, maybe you should make a video about what it's like for people who are coming to their first acupuncture treatment, what they can expect. I'm like, that's a great idea. Somebody should do that. That's not really what I'm doing right now. So it's kind of like, if you are a student or a practitioner, or you just want to review some things, I do have a website, tcmstudy.net. There's a acupuncture, or there's a YouTube channel that if you search my name or basically anything about acupuncture, it's likely my face will show up. But it's kind of like, if you're just someone who's interested in getting an acupuncture treatment, it's going to be really long and boring. So you don't need to go there.
Yeah, so if you're a Chinese medicine student looking for quizzes, reviews, courses, I think you even have a Patreon, if I remember, too, on that for PDFs. So if you're studying Chinese medicine, check out Nicholas at tcmstudy.net. Now we're going to head into the private section. So with that, thank you everyone for watching this public section of the episode. And then we are now moving to the practitioner private end. So have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.